What's up, Sixers fans? This is the Sixers Talk podcast presented to you by Wilmington University. WilMU works. No Danny Palmels today, so you stuck with me driving the car. Ben Berry, follow me on Twitter at I am Ben Berry, as well on Instagram. I'm joined by the one, the only, the great writer from NBC Sports Philadelphia, Noah Levick. Noah, how you doing today?
Hey Ben, I'm doing okay. Yeah, it's all the days are blending together at this point in the Sixers world, but the All-Star break approaches, and it's an interesting time for the franchise for sure.
They're running together, but last night, I'm sure that loss to the Celtics stands out. We'll get to that shortly. We're also going to get to the Sixers, who they can pick up on the buyout market. Joel Embiid, James Harden, the deal's done. We had a podcast last week about it. We haven't heard Noah's thoughts. Both players did have a press conference yesterday. We'll get to that in a second. And we are going to rank the Eastern teams by what they did at the trade deadline. But let's start off. James Harden, Ben Simmons, both had introductory press conferences with their new teams, respectively, the Nets and Sixers yesterday. What were some of your takeaways from the press conferences?
I think with Ben Simmons, as far as like what we tangibly learned, he said there's no firm date for his return, but he was asked specifically about March 10th when the Sixers played the Nets, and he said he hopes to be ready for that game. He said he had some dark times over the last 6 months and that he's been dealing with mental health issues here for a while and, is glad to be in Brooklyn. I think outside of those sort of general takeaways, there's not much else to say. He's in an environment that's preferable to him, and he feels like he's on the right track with some of the mental health issues that he says he's been working through here, while he's been out and while he's been away from basketball. He did say he's been working out regularly, focusing on the free throw shooting, of course, and he recognizes that once he's back on the court, the foul shots are going to be important given what happened last postseason. Another interesting part was he mentioned that he heard from Tobias Harris, a few other teammates, Josh Harris, the Sixers managing partner, Elton Brand, specifically did not hear from Joel Embiid. So another indication that relationship is probably not on especially strong terms, and that those two, whenever they face each other again, it'll be must-watch television, I think. So yeah, that's kind of the main stuff that I thought was notable from Ben Simmons' introduction in Brooklyn. And then with James Harden, of course, the line that stands out is he says, Philly was my first choice when he was hoping to get out of Houston and was ultimately dealt to Brooklyn. And I think he ran through a bunch of compelling reasons why he sees the Sixers as a really attractive team for him. He's excited about Joel Embiid, thinks he's the MVP, of course. Reunited with Daryl Morey, also reunited with Tad Brown, the HBSC CEO, who held that same role with the Rockets. And he's positive on Tyrese Maxey. He thinks very, very highly of Doc Rivers, who he called one of the best coaches ever, and has previously reached out to before about wanting to be coached by Rivers. So Harden is excited about this situation, has been for a while. He noted that he plans to pick up his player option for next season, though he hasn't yet, and all indications are that he wants to be a Sixer for the long term. So I think that was the main thing we learned from his press conference. And then, of course, we had the amusing moment with Paul Millsap when the four-time All-Star, let's not forget, finally fielded a question and, appreciated that and said it was getting a little weird that he hadn't heard anything yet. So, it was a surreal day, I think, in many ways, just to see Ben Simmons and James Harden, in different destinations and talking about their new situations. And it's a real shift in the NBA world, I think.
So I'm going to start off with Ben Simmons. And I've avoided most of the mental health stuff since that report came out, and I will continue to do so. I will say that I thought he looked unprepared for the press conference. The reason I say he looked unprepared was because he said the mental health thing started before the playoffs, before Game 7. And I know you're around the team a lot more than me, and I'm sure the team, although they said they didn't hear anything about it, they would have kept it in-house. I would have asked why didn't he add. I was intrigued why none of the reporters didn't ask why he didn't ask for time off last season. Then he also said in the press conference the mental health issues didn't play a role in anything, which is kind of conflicting from all the reports, what Rich Paul put out there last year. So to me, it just seemed like he looked unprepared overall, which is unfortunate. I think I'm in the rare exception. Like, I wish it would have worked out here, but by no means do I want anyone to fail at life. I want everyone to succeed, except when their goals might line up with mine. And I don't want the Nets to be better than Brooklyn, but by no means do I want him to crash and burn for the rest of his career. But his press conference, some of his answers just made me feel like he was unprepared for the questions. He tried to give the most political correct answers. Does that make sense, Noah?
I will say, I think, he mentioned last year on the record that he was dealing with mental issues. He was asked specifically, I believe after Game 5, whether he thought his problems were more mental or physical, and he said simply more mental. And there was stuff that folks were aware of that he was going through as well in his personal life. So I don't think it'd necessarily be fair to characterize him as trying to make that an issue that he hadn't already raised. As far as why he continued playing, I mean, it's the NBA playoffs, and he's a competitive person. And my sense is he wanted to continue to compete and try to help his team win and try to work through what he was going through. And I think a lot of this is difficult to define, and in ways that certain physical injuries aren't, because one can be not 100% mentally and dealing with some mental difficulties, but not have something, again, that's easy to classify or easy to understand how to best deal with necessarily. And it's fluid too. Like, all of us, we're different day-to-day mental health, and that there are factors that impact us there, some of which are, obvious and external, and some of which are kind of mystifying, I think. I think through all of it, especially with the foul shooting, just what stood out to me as it was happening was that he just didn't have a grasp on it. He did not have a handle on it, and that was frustrating to someone who's used to being so dominant and competing at such a high level. Like, even after that Game 5, where I think he was like 3 for 10 at the foul line, with many of those misses being costly ones in a huge Sixers collapse, he said, I have no idea why the free throw shooting has dropped off so much, but I need to get it back. And I think at that point it was clear that he probably wasn't going to improve the foul shooting anytime soon, because there were underlying issues here that were not physical issues, of course. So yeah, I'm with you in thinking like it's not our place to
judge,
to say that X, Y, or Z suggests that he approached something the wrong way, specifically in terms of mental health. Now that's not at all to say Ben Simmons is immune to criticism, and that him and his representation made mistakes through this process, and how they went about trying to get out of Philadelphia and hoping that, it would be possible to do so and wait out a season and everything. But with the mental health side, I hear him say he was in a dark place, that he feels better, that he doesn't know when he's going to play soon. And I continue to say, all right, good, on a personal level, that this human being says he's in a better place. And then on the basketball level, okay, we'll see when he plays again. Maybe it'll be before March 10th, and maybe Sixers fans will get to see him in action then. And I'm very, very intrigued what the on-court stuff's going to be like in Brooklyn. One little note that he brought up in that press conference was he envisions it being similar to that 2017-18 Sixers team. He mentioned J.J. Redick, Ersan Ilyasova, Marco Bellinelli. So pace and shooting and ball movement, and he sounded excited about all those things. And I'm really curious what he is going to look like on the court.
It'll be very interesting to see what he looks like on the court, how Steve Nash handles and juggles the health, players returning, fitting Ben Simmons into that lineup, and just making sure it all runs smoothly. So you touched on Harden. I did not. Harden's press conference, I thought he tried to say everything politically correct while not throwing his old teammates and friends under the bus. He said that Philly was his first choice over a year ago when he was in Houston. Philly was his first choice. He ended up in Brooklyn, which was a new situation. I think he was originally happy there. But for some reason, it didn't work out. He didn't look happy. He said that Kyrie Irving's vaccination status played minimal role, and he thinks Kyrie should do whatever. I'm paraphrasing. Kyrie should do what he sets his heart on, what he feels comfortable. He didn't try to tell him to get the vaccination and things like that. I wonder if Brooklyn feels like a middleman that he got, since he couldn't get traded to Philly from Houston a year ago, or I think it was about 13 months ago to be exact. He got traded to Brooklyn. It didn't work out. So now he's in Philly. And although Brooklyn gave up a lot to get him, they got a young all-star in return a little over a year after trading for James Harden.
They did. The answer you mentioned on Irving was certainly interesting. He noted that those three, himself, Irving, and Kevin Durant just never got to play that much together. And Irving being unvaccinated is one of the reasons why. And then unfortunate injuries, of course, is another key reason. And he basically said, winning could have papered over a lot of that other stuff and a lot of the other issues that were present there. But I think he delineated a few ways in which he thinks this situation is preferable. And I think reading between the lines a little bit, the head coach is probably one of them. Steve Nash is not in Doc Rivers' league in terms of experience. And Harden specifically pointed to just how much Rivers has seen and that he's eager to learn from him, and that even as a 10-time All-Star, he still needs to be taught. I think that's a factor here that matters, and that he, in comparison to Brooklyn, thinks is an advantage that the Sixers specifically have. But of course, we could all sense Daryl Morey's excitement that he made this happen, especially after waiting and after not having it come to fruition when Harden wanted out of Houston. And I also thought that it was notable from Morey that he was so candid about prioritizing Tyrese Maxey and Matisse Thybulle. He's clearly proud that he pulled that off and that those two are still Sixers. And the way he framed it, which I think is fair enough, is sure, the Sixers are making a push to try to win now, but they're not abandoning their future entirely, in the sense that you've got Maxey and Thibault as players that might have a lot of room to grow here, and might be much better than they already are 2 or 3 years down the line. So I also, just looking at the Sixers situation, they've sold off all these first round picks, but the team does have a strong recent draft record in the second round. Isaiah Joe, Paul Reed, Shake Milton, Charles Bassey, like these guys are all late second round picks. And draft wise, the Sixers might need to make that habitual to just keep nailing those second round picks, given that they have sold off those first, in part to get James Harden and to just do their best here to win in Joel Embiid's prime.
Before we move on to ranking the rest of the East and the moves they made at the deadline, I'm wondering how the rest of the NBA, the other owners, the GMs, how they feel, or where do they feel more of a sigh of relief that things didn't work out in Brooklyn because KD, Kyrie, and James Harden were never on the court at the same time? If I feel like if they were fully healthy, they probably would have run roughshod over the league for probably a good 3 to 4 years. I'm not saying they would have won a championship every year, but they would have at least got to the Eastern Conference Finals and would have been close to unbeatable. Every team's beatable, but you know what I'm saying. Or that even though Ben Simmons sat and forced his way out, and people think that James Harden also forced his way out, it was two situations that a lot of writers, you heard reports from front office executives, and that they were worried about just how the league might unfold from these things. If a player could force his way out of a deal when he has 3-4 years left on the deal, or if this super team, even though I don't fully believe in that phenomenon, would just go to not bigger and better, but to go to the next level. How do you feel like front office executives feel about how both of those things played out? They more relief that one worked out more than the other?
I think there's probably widespread relief that this deal is done and that it did not linger for an entire season. And I think certainly on both sides there, if it had lasted past the trade deadline, the animosity probably would have escalated and there would have been a lot more frustration. I think Simmons' situation is in all likelihood unique, and I'm not so sure that it's something that we're going to see anything similar to down the line, in part, as we discussed, because there's the mental health component with Simmons, and it is just not common for a player with 4 years left on a rookie max extension to decide that's not where he wants to be, for things to go south that quickly. Now, as Simmons described it, like this wasn't an instantaneous decision, and there was some building up to that point. But I just think overall, you're probably not going to see like anything like that soon. I think the league will definitely try to see, exactly what went wrong. And I think a lot of it will just be hoping similar circumstances never unfold again, to be honest. Harden, on this kind of general topic, I thought was honest at his press conference and saying the reality is like stars usually go where they want to go. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. That's just the way it is. So yeah, the players have definitely gotten more power in this generation, and what they want matters a lot. And the contracts they sign, do seem to matter a little bit less. But I think as things stand, there's a strong possibility that everyone comes out of this reasonably happy. At least that's how it seems right now. And it could have been a lot worse than that, most definitely, if Sean Marks and Daryl Morey had not seen fit to agree upon a deal.
It could have ended up so much worse than it was and a lot nastier. Agree with what you said on Harden, like star players going to go where they want. And the pressure from the team is usually I have to trade this star player so I can get something back over nothing, even if it's 50 cents on the dollar. Also, what you said, like we've never seen it before, a situation like Ben Simmons, so we'll probably never see it again. And I'm thinking NBA is hoping that they never see something like that again, where a front office has to hold down the fort and think we're not trading this guy. He has 4 years left on his contract. And I'm thinking most players probably might feel somewhat of a similar way. Can't guarantee it because I feel like things like this are things that'll come back up in negotiations when the CBAs, if owners feel like players have too much power, if they'll just sit out like if they know they can get an E trade. Moving on, our next topic. Rank, it was a lot of deals made at the deadline. We're not going to get into all of them, but some teams in the East got better. Some teams may have gotten worse. Noah, what deals stood out making a team better or worse, and how would you rank the teams in the East after the trade deadline?
I mean, I'm looking at the East right now, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that every one of the 10 teams, in a playoff or play-in spot, you could make a case for them like making a run to the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, I legitimately think this is as wide open as it's been in a really long time. The Atlanta Hawks, who made the Eastern Conference Finals last season, are in 10th. Toronto Raptors are in 7th and had an 8-game winning streak, I believe, recently. The Brooklyn Nets are in 8th, and despite all that has gone wrong here, they still have Ben Simmons, Kyrie Irving, Kevin Durant on their roster. So I struggle to find like a clear favorite, to be honest, in the Eastern Conference. And as we'll get into later, Boston Celtics look awfully good recently. They won their 9th straight game in Philadelphia. I think quite obviously the most impactful deadline move was the Simmons Harden deal. And as I mentioned earlier, I think there's the potential that it significantly improves both teams. But it's easier said than done that you make a big move and then your roster is substantially upgraded, because it does take a while to integrate guys. And in both these cases, Simmons and Harden, they're not playing immediately. Harden is out through the All-Star break with this left hamstring injury, just trying to make sure that's at 100%. And then Ben Simmons, there's not a firm date on when he returns. So the East is there for the taking. I think the Chicago Bulls have proven they're not fluky, and they're going to be at or near the top of the standings at the end of the season. And DeMar DeRozan's having a special year. So, yeah, I'm not going to name a really clear favorite at this point. I think for the most part, outside of the Sixers, other teams did not make moves that are going to swing things big one way or the other. So it's Sixers and Nets went all in, and we'll see how that works out.
I agree with you that the Sixers and Nets haven't made any moves that swing things open too big. I feel like the Sixers got what they needed, the Nets got what they needed. After looking at the trade line deals and looking more into teams' records, man, every team in the East has been hit hard by health from the teams that at the top of the conference down. I didn't realize Brook Lopez hasn't played since opening night, and the amount of games Giannis, Drew Holiday have been limited to in Milwaukee. Bam Adebayo, Kyle Lowry, and Jimmy Butler have only played 18 games together in Miami. We know about Ben Simmons not playing here in Philly. James Harden, the hamstring injury when he was with the Nets. Kyrie missing half the season. Kevin Durant's out right now. Injuries has been the more standout thing to me. Once I did a deeper dive, as you said, Chicago looks like the real deal, a true contender. The East is wide open, and I feel like if a team can just catch fire, they can make a run, whether it's the 1 seed all the way up to the teams in the play-in game. I think it's truly wide open, and it goes back to something I've said, something you said, something Danny said, how important it was for the Sixers to make a deal right now, so it wouldn't all fall on Embiid. The Eastern Conference is wide open.
Right. I think I'd made the point once or twice that, okay, even if the Sixers don't make the splashy deal and they do something on the margins, you can tell yourself they've got a chance this year. It's a lot easier to say they've got a chance now because they've got James Harden and Joel Embiid on their roster, and that, of course, is up there with the best top-end talent in the conference, in the league. I almost feel a little ridiculous saying a team in 8th or 9th or 10th could make the Eastern Conference Finals, but I think you could make a legit argument for every single one of these teams. And to be honest, they've all got significant flaws. You could run through every single one of those rosters. Chicago is not an especially deep team. The Charlotte Hornets are young and exciting, but they don't have a lot of playoff experience, and they flopped in the playing game last year. And you could go through all these. The Sixers, of course, are still weak in rebounding, and defense remains a huge question mark, even though they managed to hold on to Thibault. And it's wide open in part because no one here is anywhere near perfect. And in part because you said, the injuries mean that there haven't been a lot of sustained stretches where all the best players are on the court at once and able to gel and able to figure out what works. And it's probably going to be mostly about who peaks at the right times and then which teams are best constructed for playoff basketball. I think the hope on the Sixers end, of course, is it's now a lot easier for them to score points in the half court because they've got guys who draw free throws, guys who score in isolation, guys who draw double teams, which are all great boxes to be able to check when the playoffs come around.
I agree and love so much what you just said, and I'm looking at these standings right now. There's not a clear-cut team that I would prefer for the Sixers to face in the first round between who's sitting 8-1 right now, maybe the Cavaliers, since Cavaliers are 4 and the Sixers are 5. But man, the East is deep, and I know growing up, it was the East that was better than the West, primarily because Jordan. Then it was the early 2000s through the end of the decade where the West was just hands down more dominant, and people thought the East was a joke, that the West should get more playoff teams and things of that sort. These things come and go, but it's fun to see how competitive the East is again, where it's just isn't hey, if you get a top 3 seed, it's pretty much a walk that first round of the playoffs.
Agreed. Yeah. Just glancing at these standing, I'd say the Heat, Bulls, Bucks, the Sixers would not want to face those teams in the first round. Those stand out as probably in the higher tier, and you prefer to avoid those guys early on. I think we saw last night the Boston Celtics are a tough out when Jalen Tatum and Jason Brown are both at their best and the ball movement's strong and the defense is locked in. And the Toronto Raptors have historically guarded Embiid very well. And I think you would be a little concerned about that matchup. So I think I pretty much agree with you that it's tough to figure out, okay, this is an especially easy opponent. So it's going to be fascinating to see how this unfolds. Maybe one of the teams out of the playoff picture even sneaks in there in the Wizards or the Knicks. Maybe one of those teams kind of figures it out a little bit. But I think predictions are especially hard this season. It's really interesting to follow it all.
He's Noah Levick. I'm pointing, but you can't see my finger unless I raise it up a little. I'm Ben Berry. Going to take this quick timeout, come back. I want to discuss one of those teams that are right in the thick of the playoff race that the Sixers did not look great against last night. Start college, build skills, and complete your degree with Wilmington University. 100% online options and affordable tuition makes WillMU work for you. Learn more at willmu.edu. Noah, trade deadline is going to pass. We got your thoughts on the Sixers move. The re-ranking, talking about the Eastern Conference is just how much fun it's going to be going down the stretch. But what was not fun was last night. If you're listening to this, I assume you know the score already. I know at one point I got a text message and it was asked if the score was real. The Sixers was down as many as 51 points. I don't know. I lost count. They just got mollywopped. I don't know what else to say by the Boston Celtics. They beat three straight teams by 30 points. I believe that's the first time in NBA history. I don't even know where to begin. It was just an ugly performance all around. What were some of your takeaways?
That's accurate. I think for me, the way it felt was they had shoot around in the morning. They had the James Harden press conference at noon, and then the day was essentially done. There was nothing positive to be gleaned from that game other than Paul Millsap played for the first time in a little over a month and actually looked decent in deep garbage time. He entered with the Sixers down 43 points. So Millsap looks like, he's still capable of playing, and I am curious to see whether he actually will get meaningful minutes at some point here in the Sixers front court, especially since there's now the opening there with Andre Drummond gone. As far as the overall performance, I struggle to remember the worst time the Sixers played that badly. Part of what was strange and jarring about it for me was Joel Embiid was on the court. Like the one performance that was, I guess, almost as bad was the road loss in Utah by 35 earlier this year. But this was a home game. Had Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid, actually did Joel Embiid things in terms of drawing free throws and kicking the ball out to open shooters off of double teams, but literally almost everything besides that was like atrocious. And if you play low-level basketball against a hot team with two star wings and other players that are in sync around them, I guess this is going to be the final result. But these games happen over a long season. I know that's not a satisfying thing to say, but it's just the reality. And to me, it's not something you panic about or read too much into unless there are elements that went wrong here, that recur over and over moving forward, or the Sixers turn in another stinker on Thursday night against the Bucks. But I think it's a very safe bet that they will play better on Thursday night, because how could they not?
Yeah, it can't get worse. It was shocking because Embiid was on the court, and Embiid finished with 19, most of those coming from the charity strike. Man, and it makes you think if Embiid wasn't out there, just how much worse it would be. It wasn't a good game from anybody. We saw Paul Millsap for the first time, I think, since Christmas Day. I know he's played 3 times. Last night was the 4th time since Christmas Day, but I forgot he was in the league until the trade happened, because that's how infrequently I saw him. Man, Matisse Thybulle, it's pretty much when he's out there, the defenders, they don't defend him. And we know the whole league, every NBA fan knows that he's pretty much a minus on the offensive end. They might as well yell, "He's with us," which they did to Russell Westbrook in the bubble when he would shoot threes, because no one's worried about him knocking down any shots. Tobias had his time to cook, whether it was a post up, whether it was creating off the dribble, and it just did not look good. I can say I had some fun watching Joel Embiid try that James Harden step back. At that point, it was just, let me just try to entertain myself and find the humor in things, but it was not a good game from beginning to end.
Yeah, the one little amusing story I'll tell there is we'd seen that from Joel Embiid, at shoot around. So him and James Harden and Sam Cassell were out on the court discussing like the little mechanics of Harden's patented step back and how is that not a travel? And the way Joel Embiid is doing it right now, it is a travel. The officials called that. So, he's known for being brilliant at picking up little tools from other players, whether it's Chris Paul's little fake pass that he did against the Cavs, or the Kobe Bryant-esque fadeaways, or the Dirk Nowitzki one-leg shots. The James Harden step back, if he wants to add that, it's going to take a little bit of time. And I thought it was an especially fitting, little wrap up to the worst half they've played this season. And yeah, yesterday and the last 4 or 5 days, it's all been excitement and euphoria, frankly, I think, like just related to James Harden as a Sixer. And last night was a big return to earth. And now they've got to lock in again on business and try to at least play a lot better against Milwaukee. And then they've got some time to rest and recalibrate. But I think it's at least a good thing that this was not their final game before the All-Star break, because that would have been an especially sour way to go into it. They've at least got a chance to go into it on a higher note with this game against the Bucks.
Yeah, I'm glad they still have one more game against the All-Star break. That would have been an ugly way to limp into the All-Star break. But it's not the end-all, be-all. You said earlier that the excitement from the trade, the games earlier this week and over the weekend, it was the James Harden press conference, shoot around, and they just came out flat. It's not much to read into. I don't think it's a bigger sign of things to come. I think it's just a reminder that before the trade, it was all Joel Embiid, and if he didn't play well, there wasn't much hope or glimmer. After the Bucks on Friday, they'll have some time to regroup. Harden won't play until after the All-Star break, coming back from the hamstring injury. I know Joel Embiid down there, but it's a time to regroup, reset, and get ready for this stretch run coming down the stretch towards the playoffs. One thing I wanted to mention was the Celtics, 9-game winning streak, won 3 games in a row by 30 or more points. And they started off that 9-game winning streak with a 30-point win over, what was it, Miami? So, yeah, they are coming around. Still 1 game under 500, but they're coming around.
Yeah, and I guess – now that it's happened, it makes some sense in that it takes some time for a new head coach and Ime Udoka to figure out that role. And also, Boston had quite a few games early in the season where they were building 20, 25, 30-point leads and then blowing them. So at least the work to get to that point was good, and now they are holding those 30-point leads, and even in the case of last night's game, extending them. I think there would have been arguments you could make as to why you would try to pull the plug on this Tatum-Brown duo, but then you see how good they have been lately, and the fact is they're still young, and as long as you have those guys on your team, I think you do have a really strong chance at playoff success. So yeah, they're going to be in this mix. As we said, unclear exactly where the teams fall in the Eastern Conference, but Boston looks like they're up there.
So that was the game. We don't need to spend much more time about it because it wasn't fun. And I want everyone to start off their Wednesday morning with a joy. So NBA buyout market. We're here. Players are being bought out. Hit the open market. Who's a player you're hoping the Sixers can pick up on the buyout market?
So I think in terms of where to look, like Doc Rivers has been straightforward on multiple occasions and saying the team will explore what's out there in terms of a big guy. Paul Reed has backed up Joel Embiid the last 3 games, and Rivers likes some of the qualities he brings to the table as a small ball center, but right now the only like traditional center on the Sixers roster is Charles Bassey, a rookie second round pick. And evidently at the moment, Bassey is behind Reed in the pecking order. As we mentioned, Paul Millsap is in this mix as well, but clearly the Sixers will explore if there are opportunities to get better there. So with the big guys, I think there are a few possibilities. Again, guys that are not yet on the buyout market, but might be. One of those being Robin Lopez, another being former Sixer, and the reason the Sixers have Tyrese Maxey, Mike Muscala, and then DeAndre Jordan, perhaps a reunion with Doc Rivers wouldn't stun me if that happened. None of those players are saviors. They're all flawed, but they are NBA big men who would supplement the Sixers' depth in various ways at that position. So as far as like what's realistic or what might be on the table, those are three names that seem rather logical to me. And then outside of center, just my gut feel is that DJ Augustine is a possibility. Doc Rivers did say before the deadline that he wanted a point guard, and really he was talking about like the lack of depth behind Tyrese Maxey. He wasn't so much saying, I want star point guard James Harden.
Right.
So the Sixers, still don't have a ton of ball handling besides Harden and Maxey. They've got Shake Milton healthy again. They don't really love Furkan Korkmaz as a backup ball handler, understandably. And I don't think they'd mind adding a veteran ball handler like Augustine. Of course, Morey has that relationship with with Houston's front office, and maybe that's a factor here. And maybe DJ Augustine ends up on this team is just my gut feel. But it sure sounds like a big guy is the number one priority in what they're going to be seeking.
So you went through a list of players who could be possible candidates, not guarantees, but possible, and guys you would like them to take a look at. My number one guy, and as far as when we went to sleep, or I went to sleep last night and recording this, I want the Dragon, as you said, backup point guard, someone else that can handle the ball, Goran Dragic. I think he's a phenomenal player. He has playoff experience. He's been in the league for 14 years. I'm sure that he probably might end up like in a place like LA or somewhere else, but if the Sixers could make a move for Dragic, sign him, convince him to come here, Philly, that would be my ideal ball handler coming off the bench, taking some of the load off of Maxey and off of Harden. As far as big men, you went through all of them. You got the Robin Lopez's of the world. DeAndre Jordan has a relationship with Doc Rivers, and he helped make DeAndre Jordan a defensive stalwart. But I'm a big fan of maybe the Robin Lopez move to help the Sixers bolster the backing up Embiid. Also, I believe Dennis Schroeder could possibly be on the buyout market. I was a fan of the Sixers making – if the move would have been trading Ben Simmons for Jaylen Brown, if they could have got Dennis Schroeder back in return to back up Tyrese Maxey, I would have been a fan of that. But those are three guys I'm looking at or hopeful for.
Gotcha. Yeah. Robin Lopez, I will say, obviously, I've never covered him, but by all accounts is a beloved guy, kind of a quirky personality, intellectual, has a lot of interests outside of basketball, and just is a nice presence in a locker room, which I think matters and is something that front offices consider with some of these players who aren't stars, but you're adding into a locker room, without many games remaining. I think that will make him appealing to the Sixers, perhaps, and quite a few teams. Just the fact that, in addition to the solid on-court skills, a lot of the off-court stuff is really positive with Robin Lopez. So Yeah, he'd be an interesting addition. Of course, the Sixers saw him just last year in the playoffs with Washington. None of Washington's big men could handle Joel Embiid especially well, but I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. And I think it's fair enough that you just prefer to have options at center. And right now, the Sixers are a small team. Now, of course, Morey went small ball before around James Harden, and that's not a bad idea. But I think having a bigger guy just in case, like, there's a matchup that is just not manageable for a Paul Reed is probably a good idea, especially because Reed, though he's flashed some nice things these past 3 games, he is a second-round pick in his second NBA season without much experience and has been a little out of control and chaotic at times. And who knows what Paul Reed is going to be in the playoffs. So with a veteran like Robin Lopez, it's a little more of a known quantity. So yeah, the buyout stuff, of course, it's all developing, and we'll learn more in the coming weeks. But I'm with you that Robin Lopez feels like a logical name to monitor here.
All right, before we get out of here, got 2 questions for you, Noah. First one, what are you working on over at NBCSportsPhiladelphia.com?
Yeah, so at some point we will have a James Harden film review. Still figuring out exactly what that will focus on and when that will be, and hammering out those details. But that is high on the list. Also, hoping to talk with Paul Millsap here at some point. But yeah, really, we're like the Sixers, making this final little push before the trade deadline. We wrote about the press conference, our main takeaways yesterday, and of course, I've had a lot to write about recently. But yeah, moving forward, we'll have coverage of Sixers Bucks, see how the Sixers fare in that final matchup, and yeah, we'll go from there.
And my last question, not basketball related, but for those that don't know, me and Noah are both combat sports fans. I'm boxing as well. I know you're MMA, UFC. I'm not sure about boxing, but someone pointed out Muhammad Ali over my right shoulder. The viewers left. I know the Sixers had a game Saturday night and you're working. Did you watch any of UFC 271 sets?
I sadly have not. Maybe that's something I'll try to catch up on over the All-Star break. That's not a bad idea, but I do love watching Adesanya fight. Just the talent and the creativity as a striker. So I will hopefully get a chance to watch that one and catch up a little on my UFC. But yeah, I heard it was a competitive fight, pretty good fight.
It was a good fight. I wish Adesanya would have mixed it up more. I don't know if you know the outcome, so I'm not going to say anything. I thought you might have had a chance in some downtime.
For the listeners, so yeah.
Okay, so yeah, I don't want to spoil it for you. But it was a good card. The undercard was good. Some knockouts, some tats. The kid from Philly did well. Derek Lewis and Bam Bam Tua. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he does the shoey. They were swanging and banging. It was a good card.
Yeah, it's an entertaining sport. Yeah, I saw Derek Lewis was in a fun fight as always. So yeah, that's a little upside for us over the All-Star break. We'll have a little more time for non-Sixer sports. So yeah, that'll be fun.
He's Noah Levick. I'm Ben Berry. Danny Pomels is on vacation. Tell him to send you guys pictures on Instagram and Twitter. You can follow Noah at Noah Levick. Talk to him about the Sixers, basketball in general, or apparently UFC, because he's a fan like me. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram at I am Ben Berry. This was the Sixers Talk podcast presented to you by Wilmington University. William U. Works. We'll catch you guys later.